Good evening, everybody. If I could have everyone's attention. Good evening, everybody. We'd like to get started. I'm glad that everyone's as excited as they are to want to be continuing to talk about what I'm hoping is a very exciting idea and the progress of being able to develop the Water Street. But before I get started, first, my name is Steve Campbell. I'm the Director of Public Works for the City of Lancaster. This is a public meeting, and the meeting is being live streamed. And so when and or if there are opportunities for people to speak or ask questions, we will be asking you to also come forward and identify where you live, the block and street where you live. We're very excited to be able to take the City of Lancaster forward into this next stage of the active transportation plan. Many of you are aware of the earlier efforts related to Water Street and its development. One of the things that's exciting to me about this is that it is part of the north-south infrastructure for bicycle infrastructure, as well as how we as citizens of the city unite and connect to our history, our heritage. This was if I remember correctly, this is the historic Hoffman's Run line, and it brings the way that the city was developed together, and we're providing opportunities for people to play with it, to walk with it, to ride with it, to drive with it, to enjoy it, and hopefully everyone have a greater appreciation of the city by utilizing the Water Street corridor. I'm going to introduce Laura. I can never pronounce her last name properly, from Kittleson Associates, who will be leading the presentation. And I'm tremendously happy that as many people showed up, especially on such a rainy day, for something that is clearly important to us and very, very insightful, I think. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve. As Steve said, my name is Laura Aramjan. Don't be afraid. No one can say that one. I am a planner at Kittleson and Associates, and then first I'd like to start by introducing the consultant team that's been working on this project. So Kittleson is leading the design of this. I have with me Will Weissmantle and Alexander Johnley that have been working on the design. We're joined by Wayne Martin from Wallace Montgomery. Wallace Montgomery is doing the trail design, structural design, and looking into right-of-way. We also have AKRF, who's providing landscape architecture for green infrastructure and landscaping. We have Sandy Batinki and Jonathan Krime-Shank. And then we also have from Skelly and Loy, we have Eric Brugman, who's doing environmental and hazardous waste. And then also assisting on environmental and looking at historic resources and parks and open space. We have Ann McCanich from Wallace Montgomery as well. Also, we have Julie Wolf, who is the Lancaster County Consultant Project Manager, who's assisting with us on this. So for the presentation tonight, we're going to take you through an overview of the Water Street project and also give a recap of what was completed during the concept design phase of the project, which took us through about 2019. We'll then give you an update on the environmental process, the different things that are being looked at as part of the environmental permitting that goes along with the project. Then I'll take you through the preliminary design updates, basically what has changed since our concept design phase, what are some of the additional details that we had to share with you since we were last at a public meeting in 2019. And finally, we're going to give you a sneak peek at some ideas for public art that could be incorporated along the corridor in future phases of the project. At the culmination of the presentation, you will have another opportunity to go around, check out the boards, do some voting, and we do have a brief opportunity for voting on your phones during the presentation. If you don't want to use your phone for that, that's fine. You're welcome to just do your voting on the boards the old-fashioned way, whichever you prefer. All right, so I wanted to start with an overview of the project, and as was identified, as Steve mentioned, in the active transportation plan for Lancaster, Water Street was identified as a key north-south corridor for bicycle and pedestrian movement. So we first started the concept design and planning phase of this to identify how we could create a people-centered corridor throughout Water Street, really make that a destination, make it a safe place to walk and to bike, and also to incorporate stormwater management elements. One of the reasons that Water Street is such a great option for this is that you can avoid the higher traffic volumes that are happening on the parallel streets like Prince Street. So it's right near that main thoroughfare, but you have less traffic. Things are already moving at a slower speed, which makes it more conducive to walking and biking. There's also an opportunity on Water Street where the street does not carry through. That is city-owned land. This is an old rail line that the city owns the right-of-way. So that provides an opportunity to do an off-road trail in those areas. And since the city already has control over those properties, that much easier to implement a trail in that area. In addition to this area being identified in the Lancaster Active Transportation Plan, a subsequent plan was done. The Lancaster Vision Zero Action Plan was identified in 2022. That looks at high injury crash corridors throughout the city, of which a portion of Water Street is on that high injury network, as well as a few of the intersections on Water Street where we also see a high number of crashes. And what this project provides an opportunity for is to address those high injury locations. This provides an opportunity to slow down traffic, make crossings safer, and start to really address some of those safety concerns that were identified in the Vision Zero Action Plan. So we're going to be talking a lot tonight about bicycle boulevards. How can Water Street be transformed into a bicycle boulevard? But first of all, what is a bicycle boulevard? And it's basically a slower moving street where you keep traffic volumes pretty low. You keep them slow. Usually you want to be under 25 miles per hour, ideally 20 miles per hour. And bikers are intended to have more of a priority on that. You're not taking away any vehicular travel lanes. You're not taking away parking. So the vehicles continue to use Water Street as they do today. However, they do so more slowly, and you really focus on creating safer crossings to facilitate those bicycle movements on the boulevard. In addition to the traffic calming, a key part of bicycle boulevards is signage, right? You want to have signs that are alerting people that bicycles are going to be on the road, alerting people to crossings that are coming up, and then also using pavement markings. And you'll be able to see those on the plan views that are both here on the table and on the boards. So the study area for the Water Street corridor is from Fairview Avenue to the north to Harrisburg Avenue to the south. Throughout the corridor, Water Street is typically 25 feet wide with 2 9-foot travel lanes, one in each direction, and 1 parking lane on the west side of the street. The posted speed is 25 miles per hour. And as I noted, we do have 3 intersections on the corridor that were identified as high crash locations on the Vision Zero Action Plan. A quick overview, as I mentioned, we already did a concept design and planning phase for this project. Some of you may have participated in some of the public meetings that we had as part of that concept design. So that was phase 1, and that took place from the winter of 2019 through the fall of 2019. We moved into phase 2, preliminary design, which is what we are presenting on here tonight, in fall of 2020, and we'll be continuing to work on preliminary design through summer of 2022. At that point, we will switch into final design, where we go into even more detail on the designs that we're doing to prepare all of our construction plans, and we are aiming to go to construction of the project in probably 2024, with construction in 2024 and 2025. For the project vision and goals, as I mentioned, we really want this to be a people-centered corridor where people of all ages and abilities can travel comfortably throughout the corridor. So that's for people walking, that's for people biking, and it's also creating safer conditions for vehicular traffic as well. Some of the goals that we want to achieve through implementation of this project is creating that low-speed environment, actually lowering the speed limit to 20 miles per hour instead of 25. I mentioned the Vision Zero plan, and the goal of Vision Zero is to get to 0 traffic deaths. The biggest indicator of whether you're going to have a severe fatality or a death from a traffic incident is speed. The lower the speeds are, the more likely that you are to be able to walk away from that. And that is why we want to keep speeds as low as possible on the Water Street corridor to create that safe, comfortable environment for all users. We also want to increase the number of people walking and biking, reduce the number of crashes for all modes of travel, And we also want to look at ways to incorporate green infrastructure along the corridor. This would be similar to the green infrastructure that the city is already doing on corridors such as Mulberry and Charlotte. Some of the key issues that we noted along the corridor during our existing conditions analysis is that it's a very constrained right-of-way, right? There's not extra space here in the road that you can put in a bike lane or anything like that. The lanes are already narrow, the parking lane is narrow, and so we have a limited amount of space to deal with. Similarly with the sidewalks. In an ideal world, we'd have much wider sidewalks to facilitate pedestrian movement. However, the corridor itself is too constrained to widen out those sidewalks without impacting vehicular operations, which, as we know, this still needs to be a corridor that cars can travel in both directions and you still have your parking. Throughout the corridor, we have a lack of signalized intersections and the crossings aren't overly well marked, so that can make it problematic for people crossing the street. There are also numerous driveways in areas that can create more conflicts. And especially in the southern part of the corridor, where we do have those sections where the road does not go through and we have trails, there are some light industrial uses in that area. So we need to think about how bicycle and pedestrian traffic is going to interact with those industrial uses. Finally, similar to the industrial, we recognize that this is a corridor that trucks use. So any of the things that we're doing at the intersections along the corridor need to be able to accommodate truck turns. So that's something that we took into consideration during our design. As I mentioned, during phase one, we had a couple of public activities to try to get feedback and get input on the concept designs that we were considering. The first of these took place in May of 2019 at the Lancaster Open Streets event. That year, Open Streets was on the Water Street corridor, so I don't know if any of you came to our booth, but we had corridor plans laid out where we were asking people for input on what they'd like to see. We had a toolbox of the different treatments we were looking at and some of the concepts for intersection design. We then had a public meeting in September of 2019, which took place at the Boys and Girls Club on the Water Street corridor, where we gave a presentation on the design and had boards and got some feedback there, and overall received very positive feedback on the design. Some of the things that we heard about were concerns about lighting and trail safety, and of course making sure that vehicular operations could continue on the corridor. What came out of phase one is we identified a toolkit of treatments. I'm going to go over these briefly right now because we're going to be discussing these concepts throughout the rest of the presentation. So as I noted, we recognize that the typical section of Water Street with its 2 lanes and its parking lanes needs to stay consistent in the design of the boulevard. So where we're looking at treatments mostly are at intersections. We're looking at things like high visibility crosswalks. It's going to make it safer for pedestrians to cross. In some cases, we're looking at raised intersections to slow traffic down even more as they're making those crossings. We also have a location where we're looking at a raised intersection. That's where the entire intersection is raised up to sidewalk level. So the entire intersection almost serves as a speed hump and slows cars down as they're moving through the intersection. We're also looking at curb bump outs. Curb bump outs basically take place wherever you have a parking lane at the corner where parking is illegal anyway because you can't park within 20 feet of the intersection. The sidewalk can then bump out into that lane, and that shortens the crossing distance. That makes it so much safer for pedestrians to cross because they have less amount of space if they're in the road making that crossing. Those curb bump outs also provide opportunities for the green infrastructure that I mentioned earlier, and we'll be showing you some images of what those can look like. All the things that I just mentioned are things that are happening at intersections. On the corridor itself, in between intersections, we are looking at speed humps to slow traffic down. I mentioned that we want to keep things at that 20 miles per hour to keep it as safe as possible, so those are being installed as well. And then the other thing that came out of concept design is we developed a series of intersection plans and renderings to give folks a sense of what this would look like. And I wanted to show these here because now that we're in preliminary design, we have very detailed designs at this point, but they don't look quite as pretty as the concept design ones. So I wanted to give you a sense of what those looked like at that time. We've since refined these drawings to make sure that they're buildable. They work with the utilities that are underground. They work with truck turning. But this gives you a sense of how the corridor was originally envisioned when we were in the concept design phase. So with that, I am going to hand it off to Eric and Anna to talk us through some updates on the environmental process for the project.
Because this project does include federal funding, it falls under the National Environmental Policy Act, which is known as NEPA. And there are three particular components of that I'd like to speak about tonight. One of them is Section 4F of the U.S. Department of Transportation Act of 1966. This requires that parks and historic sites be considered in transportation project development. There's also Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966, the NHPA. That requires that federal agencies consider the effects of projects on historic properties. There's a little bit of overlap between the two. There's also Executive Order 12898, which requires federal actions to address environmental justice in minority and low-income populations. For parks, we have 3 parks in the project area. At the very northern end, we have Rotary Park. Approximately 1 block below that, we have Mayor Janus Historic Corridor Park. And then approximately halfway through, we have Culleton Park. A Section 4F de minimis finding may be needed for the work in the parks. Rotary Park, the one at the northern end, will be using approximately 205 square feet for temporary impact, and it will take approximately a month. The work is to replace the curb cut, which you can barely see in the bottom right-hand corner of the image there. The park will not be closed, and their other access points to the park will remain open. For the Mayor Janus Historic Corridor Park, we have also approximately 200 square feet of temporary impact. There will be a replacement of the sidewalk and the apron at the park entrance that is shown in the photograph. In the general area, we're planning curb bulb outs, curb ramps, and stormwater management. Temporary impact to be approximately 1 month, and other access to the park will remain open. The park itself will, of course, also remain open. For Culleton Park, approximately 350 square feet of temporary impact, replacement of the sidewalk at the park entrance that is shown in the photograph. In the general area, curb bump outs, raised crosswalks, curb ramps, stormwater management, and speed humps are expected. The work in the areas take about 2 months, and some areas of the sidewalk will be closed, but the park itself will remain open, other access will remain open, and the parking lot will remain open.
Hello, again, I'm Eric Bergman. Good to see everybody here. Good turnout this evening. Again, we're working on the environmental clearance for this project. And because there's federal funding involved with that, we have to comply with NEPA, as Anna said. And as you're aware, we're within the Lancaster City Historic District, which is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. So the entire 1.6 mile trail is within that project area, and we basically have to assess the impacts to that. So the goal of that is to identify what's there. We know the resources there, and then avoid impacts to that resource. And the project team has done a really good job to do that for this corridor. And there's properties within the historic district that are listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and we identify those as either contributing or non-contributing to the historic district. So there's 4 properties within the historic district that we're having temporary construction easements to. They are listed here in front of us, being the 208 Conestoga Street, the 214 Conestoga Street, the 205 Hazel Street properties, and the 72 South Prince Street properties. We can go over the details with exactly what we're doing there, when we're going through the boards this evening. But basically, there'll be temporary construction easements on there for the contractor to access the curb ramp improvements during construction. So, important to note is that this project will have no effect on the historic properties. So, that's basically what we're looking to achieve for cultural clearance for the project. And back to Anna. Thank you.
So for environmental justice for the project, this project will provide safe and improved walking and biking connections to community amenities for the traveling public, including minority and low-income populations. The project is in line with the goals of the Lancaster Vision Zero Action Plan, which emphasizes equitable and safe travel for low-income communities and communities of color.
My turn again, thank you. So one of the other resources that we have to investigate from an environmental clearance standpoint is waste sites. And within the corridor, a preliminary waste site assessment was done where we went out and completed background research and along with field reconnaissance to identify old abandoned gas stations or properties within the corridor that may have potential soil contamination, things of that sort. So we have to account for that during the process. We identified 78 sites within the corridor and basically have narrowed those down to 15 sites that we will have to complete a phase 1 environmental site assessment for during preliminary engineering and as we head into final design. So you can certainly answer any questions on those sites here after the meeting. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Eric and Anna. We call them the Environmental Dream Team. All right, so I know that I already talked a little bit about some of the components of the corridor that were identified during the concept design phase. And right now, I wanted to talk to you about where the design stands right now in preliminary design, and just to give you an update on what exactly we are looking at. So I mentioned a lot about speed and trying to keep speed low. So speed humps will be installed throughout the corridor. Typically, we are looking for these speed humps to be installed about every 150 to 200 feet or so. We've found that spacing will actually ensure that speed compliance happens. If you put the speed humps too far apart, people will just speed up in between them. So we keep them close enough together to keep those speeds low. We also will be reposting the speed limit from 25 miles per hour to 20 miles per hour along the corridor. The other key thing that I mentioned was intersection safety improvements. And on the slide and on the map, we show all of the intersections where we're looking to do intersection safety improvements, such as those curb bump outs, which are going to shorten the crossing distance, as well as the high visibility crosswalks. We're also looking at things like bicycle crossings where since we know we're going to have bicycle traffic along the corridor, we want to mark in those bicycle crossings and put in those conflict markings so that vehicles and pedestrians are aware the bicycles are going to be there, as well as facilitating movements for the cyclists that are going from the Water Street corridor to other intersecting bicycle facilities, such as the existing facility on Walnut Street and the proposed bicycle facility on Lemon Street. At 3 intersections, we have what we're calling enhanced trail crossings. These are locations where we're going to switch from on-road to off-road. So the majority of the corridor, as I mentioned, is going to be a bicycle boulevard. This is on the existing Water Street that you have today, and this is where the typical street section remains the same, with 2 lanes in each direction and 1 lane of parking. For the 2 sections where Water Street does not extend through, so there's a gap in Water Street between Conestoga and Hazel, and there's also a gap between Seymour and Hazel. In those 2 areas where the city already owns a right-of-way, we will have an off-road trail in those sections. And we want to make sure that where bikes and pedestrians are moving in between the on-road and the off-road, that we have safe transitions for them. And we're looking at 3 different treatments for those transitions. One is the raised intersection, which I mentioned at Seymour. At Hazel, we're looking at a raised crossing, and at Conestoga, we're also looking at raised crossings. And I'm going to take you through each one of those in a little more detail, and they're also presented on the boards. So I just want to go through a couple conditions along the corridor. We don't have every intersection on here in the presentation, but if you want to look in any more detail at what's happening at each intersection, I encourage you to come and look at the plan views that we have on the table here, and the design team can answer any questions that you have. First, I want to talk a little bit about what's happening at the northern terminus of the corridor with connections to James Street and Prince Street. So here on the plan view, you can see that we have bicycle markings that are connecting cyclists that are moving northbound on Water Street to connect onto James. We also are showing we're looking into doing pavement markings here on the side path that's going to connect cyclists and pedestrians going from Water Street over to the existing bike lanes on Prince Street, and this will also include a new ADA compliant ramp right here at the corner of Water Street. And we're also looking at a high visibility crosswalk at this crossing here. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about Lemon Street. This is the intersection of Water Street with a proposed bicycle facility, the eastbound connector. So in the plan view here, you can see Water Street. This would be north is facing up this way. So we have the bike lane markings here that are alerting drivers that this is where bicyclists are going to be sharing the lane with drivers. And you can see in the plan view, this is the proposed Lemon Street eastbound connector that's moving through the intersection. So in addition to high visibility pedestrian crosswalks at all 4 legs of the intersection, we're also showing bicycle crossings. These are done in green conflict paint to alert all roadway users that they should expect bicyclists in that area. And this is going to facilitate movement for the cyclists between different facility types. So if you're traveling eastbound on Lemon, there's a bicycle crossing across Water Street. If you are traveling southbound on Water Street, there's a crossing there. And if you are traveling on Lemon Street and you are looking to turn onto the Water Street corridor, there's a bike box here, which basically gives cyclists a spot to wait and rest until it's clear for them to move through the intersection. We also have crossings at this intersection to access the corridor linear park that's right here. So we show a curb bump out along Lemon Street that's going to allow for a 2-way shared use path. So the idea on this section of Lemon Street is that bicyclists and pedestrians will both be able to use that space and will be able to get into the park entrance here. And you can see that these bike crossings across Lemon Street will also help that movement happen. So northbound cyclists moving through can then use the bike crossing across Water Street at the north end of the intersection and get onto the shared use path. You can also see in this plan view, I mentioned curb bump outs, which is something that we're doing at a lot of the intersections. And this is just an example of how you can see them in action. On the Water Street side, we can only do a curb bump out on the side of the street where you already have parking. So you're going to see those bump outs on the west side of the street, so the curb bumps out here, and once again shortens that crossing distance. And then you can also see the bump out on Lemon Street that's making room for that shared use path. I know there have been some questions about parking, and for the most part, any spot that we're doing these kinds of bump outs right at the intersection are typically happening within that 20 feet that parking is already illegal. We do have a couple of spots along the corridor, such as here on Lemon Street, where the bump out is happening with existing parking spaces, once again, to facilitate that connection to the park that's right there. The next intersection I want to talk about is Walnut Street. This is where the Water Street corridor will be existing with an existing bicycle facility. This is where we have a parking separated bike lane that's traveling in the westbound connection. And in this spot, most of the intersection treatments have already been constructed here, but we will be adding a green bike box that will allow cyclists that are traveling west on Walnut Street to wait here in the bike box before turning right to head north on the Water Street corridor. I mentioned that I would talk you through each of those trail transition areas in a little more detail. So first up, I wanted to talk about Conestoga Street. So to the north on Conestoga, this is where we have the on-road portion of Water Street. And to the south is where we're transitioning into a trail here. Now, this is one design that has changed a little bit since we last came out in concept design. And what we're showing right now are 2 raised crosswalks. So one crosswalk is raised on the north side of the intersection, crossing Water Street, and the other one is raised across Conestoga. And what this does is it just allows for 2 safer crossings for both bicyclists and pedestrians to get, if you're traveling southbound as a cyclist, you come through, you go over the raised intersection, you then use the dotted green conflict markings to head over to the south side of Conestoga, and then you have a short period where again you have those conflict markings across the driveway here, and then you're able to come up onto the raised crosswalk and access the trail. If you're heading in the northbound direction, You cross at the raised intersection here, and for a cyclist, at some point, come down, use the conflict markings, and get onto the road in the northbound direction. The other treatment that we're doing at this intersection is called a rectangular rapid flashing beacon, or an RRFB, which is a very fancy way of saying that is a signal that basically when a bicyclist or a pedestrian is detected, the signal will flash, alerting cars that they need to stop for the pedestrian or cyclist that is crossing Conestoga here to once again make that crossing as safe as possible. Another intersection where we are doing this transition is at Hazel. So here to the north, the trail is coming down and basically dead-ending into Hazel. At Hazel, we have a raised crosswalk. So again, this is almost acting as a speed hump on Hazel. It's going to slow the traffic down as it approaches the crosswalk, makes that crosswalk more visible. And at this point, bikes would continue on road on Hazel Street and then turn onto Water Street, where Water Street extends between Hazel and Seymour. The final location where we have to transition between on-road to off-road is at Seymour. So in this location, Hazel is up here. If you're heading south, you come down Water Street, and at this point, Seymour is a raised intersection. So basically everything in this area that I'm outlining is all at sidewalk level. So the entire intersection is raised up. Cars need to slow down to access that raised area. We have crosswalks marked across the raised intersection. Bicycle conflict markings are also noted here to show bikes the path. So southbound bikes would follow this path here, cross the green conflict zones. At this point, they would be on the sidewalk level and they'd be able to access the trail, or they'd get to the sidewalk portion and be able to access the trail. Similarly, northbound bikes are on the trail, so then they're all raised up. They use their green conflict marking here, and then they're on the roadway. In these areas, you can see these black dots here are denoting bollards that basically keep vehicles from going up on the sidewalk in that section. So if you have the cars up at sidewalk level, you want to make sure that they are not accessing the sidewalk. I know that there's a lot going on in these plan views. I really encourage you to check out this board back here after the presentation so you can look at those in more detail, and the design team can answer any questions that you have. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sandy to talk a little bit about green infrastructure, both on road and on the trail.
Thank you, everyone, for coming out on a day like today, which is, I'm glad to talk about stormwater when it's really, really coming down. So as Laura said, we've integrated stormwater infrastructure with the overall infrastructure improvements, and a lot of the systems are integrated at the curb extensions and bump outs. So again, most of you are probably, extremely familiar with the bump outs that you see throughout the city. They essentially, work by just filtering water that's sort of coming in from the street. And again, like a lot of these systems are just managing runoff on the street. So there's a couple of examples of bump outs in the city. And in addition to the bump outs, this is another topology that's we are trying to design. And again, they're stormwater planners. And the way these things are built is, essentially there's a surface expression. Oh yeah, yep. There is a surface expression, which is essentially the vegetated system, and then underneath there is a stone storage, which. Oh, I have to really, really close. Okay. So both the bump outs and the planners have a surface expression, which is the vegetated system that you see on the screen here, and a subsurface detention system, which is essentially either they're either loose stones or like, for lack of a better word, like almost like milk crates. And the way they function is that they temporarily pull back stormwater that comes into the system, and then they release it slowly back into the storm sewer system. And essentially, they function by not overwhelming any of the combined sewer system in the city. And again, for a city like Lancaster, where the stormwater infrastructure is, it's aging, anything that we can do to aid that, I think, it's a positive thing. Again, you probably have seen, the bump outs in the city, and there's a wide variety of plant materials that we can, select from that are, that are native to, I guess, sort of the eastern United States, and they also provide, ancillary benefits like, habitat for pollinators. And, first and foremost, they're really beautiful to look at, so. And, but, we're all mindful that, these are living things need to be maintained. So there's always that sort of balance between, making things that are lush and beautiful, and at the same time, that can persistently look good. So that's sort of, that's sort of the dynamic that that I, as a landscape architect, work with. And I want to bring Wayne, to talk about the off-road trail sections, and specifically around the retaining wall that will be at Conestoga Street.
Thank you, Sandy. Wayne Martin, pleasure to be here. So I want to speak specifically on two components of this off-road trail portion. So most of what you heard was the on-street concepts, and then you heard a little bit about some off-road portions in the southern end of the Water Street divide. So those will be exclusive for bikes and peds, except for one little section where it's a shared use with a driveway facility. But there's two components, right? There's grade was one of the challenges we had to deal with. So, how do you handle those grades? Retaining walls, obviously. So retaining walls can be very expensive. We're using your taxpayer dollars, so we have to come up with some feasible alternatives. So we did study two different alternatives for that retaining wall design, one being a gravity retaining wall, and the other being a modular block retaining wall. So, basically retaining walls are going to do two things. One, they're going to prevent sliding. They're going to prevent, overturning. Modular block is approved by PennDOT on PennDOT highways. That was the selected alternative based on price and site constraints. The way it'll be constructed, so these modular blocks they don't use mortar like a mortar wall. They interlock, so they're prefabricated at a plant, hauled to the site, set in place. Sometimes they're very large. Sometimes they can be only a few feet wide, but they can be large. They're set in place, they lock together. Sometimes they use pins, sometimes they have, poured concrete locks in them, keys, if you will, locked together, and then the weight of those and that interlocking mechanism will prevent that sliding and overturning. Behind the wall, so the wall, when it's constructed, it'll use like a temporary shoring, right? They'll excavate for the wall, pour a concrete pad, if you will, and then stack that wall and backfill it. The wall's set approximately 10 feet off the adjacent property lines. So, and it will be owned and maintained by the city of Harrisburg. The lower image is a visual of a similar wall. Like I said, you may see them in some highway sites, gas stations, grocery stores, etc. They're very low maintenance wall. The other image there is our best attempt at doing a rendering of the wall, and that is south of Conestoga. So there's two walls on the project. The one wall is it doesn't average, it ranges from 1 foot high to 4 feet high, 198 and a half feet long, and that's just north of Hazel. Wall 2, which is the one shown in that image, is south of Conestoga. That's the bigger wall, right? The highest point of that is 6 foot 7 inches. It's 203 feet long, and it's stepped as it goes down grade. The other thing I wanted to mention was the lighting design. So the off-trail portions will be lit. We used park level lighting, pedestrian level lighting, LED lights. The fixture that was selected is based upon a fixture used in City of Lancaster in some parks. Not much to say about it. It will be illuminated to the national best practices. And now I'll turn it back over to Sandy.
So as Wayne said, the trail, the North Water Street, which is sort of all the on-road section, that is sort of governed by the street geometry, right? You have your intersections, whereas once you start going off-street, it's a different character. Sorry. So once you're on the off-trail sections, which there's actually 2 segments, it becomes a different experience altogether. And so within this trail section, in the off-road section here, there's sort of like I guess the wall that Wayne was talking about, as well as sort of for the landscaping and for the stormwater. Most of the stormwater will be managed by sort of a passive system. So basically, it's just a swale system that's running alongside, one side of the trail. And again, one of the things that we want to do in there is, we understand that it's a light industrial area. We do want to have some vegetation that will, produce shade, provide shade, and at the same time provide some screening. So these are sort of, some more columnar species of, trees that we can possibly use to provide that screening, as well as to provide, shade and habitat. So again, looking at different sections of the trail, and this is sort of between Hazel and Conestoga. I think I guess if you're coming down, it's sort of like to the right, to the left side. It's like the sort of a light industrial area. Again, we want to have, provide screening and, possibly some rest areas as well through there. Again, more screening plants. And this is between closer to Seymour, where there is, I believe this is sort of like a share use trail here in this section. Just different types of vegetation to sort of enhance that trail experience. And lastly, this is really when you're very farther down, sort of the south end of the trail, and that's sort of closer to Fairview. I believe there is the SPCA site that's close by. So again, it's sort of making that balance between screening and and still giving it a sense of place. Again, there's existing vegetation and cover, all along the site that the plantings will have to respond to. So, again, more plants. And lastly, scattered throughout the site, we want to present opportunities for people to, to rest and to, experience different vantage points. And again, there's just different options for furnishings. The style that you see here is pretty similar to what the city of Lancaster has as their standard. But that being said, it's not to say that we have to stick to one vernacular. We can introduce new styles, especially because, the city is in transition. We want to adopt maybe give the corridor a different signature. And, one of the ways of doing that is sort of, picking sort of these select furnishings that really, put an imprimatur on the overall landscape. So, And lastly, Lancaster has an amazing industrial heritage. I think, we want to maybe honor that. And one of the ways that we could do that is, either you introducing furnishing that sort of respond to the local architecture and or like reuse some of the found industrial materials. And, in the process, possibly save some taxpayer monies. So, and I think you'll have an opportunity to vote on, which styles you prefer. So, yep.
Really quick, as I mentioned, we do have an opportunity here if you want to use your phones to vote. You also have an opportunity to do it on the board in the back. It's really up to you, but as Sandy mentioned, at this point, we haven't picked a design yet for the site furnishings, and we're looking for feedback from you on what you think would be most appropriate for the corridor. Is it something more on the traditional side? Is it switching it up to go to modern? Or is it doing something to incorporate that industrial heritage? So if you would like to do it online, you can, and it's just, you can either text LAURA 161 to the number 22333, or you can go to the website. If you do it right now, it'll show up on the screen in real time. And if you would prefer, we also have dots available, and you can vote on the preferred location at the board in the back. So far, modern is winning. Come on, that means that other people need to vote. I have no doubt about it. Yes. That's fine. The dots are at the boards, and you will have time after this to do so. So, we're in a dead heat now. I don't know what's gonna win. And so these are the types of things that we are going to be determining in the final design phase, which is one of the reasons why this is a great time in the design process to start to get some of this feedback. During concept design, we got some really great feedback on what people wanted to see along the corridor. We were able to incorporate that into preliminary design, and the types of things we hear tonight can also inform on final design. All right, so far, industrial is looking good. We'll have to see how it all shakes out. This voting will also be available on the Engage website, and as I said, at the boards, we'll be compiling all of that together and determining which one of these styles. The examples, images that we showed tonight are all examples, but we'll be using those to kind of guide our decision making as we pick the specific furnishings. And the final thing I wanted to talk about tonight is not something that we are currently designing right now, but something that we wanted to get your feedback on about opportunities to incorporate public art along the corridor. So we recognize that a lot of things that we've been talking about here tonight are very focused on how we can get transportation infrastructure in the ground in the next couple of years. But this corridor also provides an opportunity for placemaking improvements, and how do we make this the type of corridor that people really want to gravitate towards, to spend some extra time on, to celebrate the heritage of the stream that used to flow through there. So public art is something that the city will be considering in future phases of the project. And we wanted to use this opportunity tonight to get your feedback on some of the initial ideas that have been developed by a public artist, Stacy Levy. So all the images that I'm going to be showing here tonight have been developed by Stacy. And just wanted to get your feedback on what is speaking to you and what you think some of the key opportunities along the corridor might be. So some of the potential locations that we can think about doing public art, one is on the sidewalks themselves. Literally paint or different types of treatments embedded into the sidewalk that will help guide you down the path of the sidewalk. Similarly, we can do those types of treatments on the trail surface itself. There's also things that we can do at the intersections, things in curb bump outs, things that we can do in the green infrastructure areas. Another location are trail bioswales. So as Sandy mentioned, for the trail itself, some of the stormwater will be managed underneath the trail, and some of it will be managed adjacent to the trail in a swale. So that's a location that we can think about doing public art. And then the retaining wall is another spot, those two retaining walls that we discussed. And then finally, the trail shoulder. So basically that spot right next to the trail. And our design team worked closely with Stacy to identify what types of spots could be available. And all the images I'm going to show, she was trying to incorporate as much as possible the theme of water and some of the industrial heritage of the Water Street corridor into her designs. So just some images to give you a sense. Once again, these are all ideas of what could be possible. One is using glass insets in the sidewalk itself that can help you guide you down the path, let you know that you're in a special place. Also, thermoplastic sidewalk paint can be used at the intersection. So Stacy overlaid one of the intersection redesigns of Strawberry and Farnham where we're showing bump outs and is adding this thermoplastic paint to the sidewalk itself to once again let you know that you are in a special place. And if you start thinking about doing these types of treatments in a rhythm along the corridor, right, every time you have a bump out, you do a certain thing. Every time you have a bioswale, every time you're in a certain spot on the trail, it really gives people a rhythm as they're moving through the space and lets them know that they're somewhere special. Similarly, she wanted to think about how we could map different flows of water. If we think about where water is just flowing across the street, where it's being conveyed in pipes that might be happening underneath the roadway, where it's infiltrating, so where we have a bioswale and we know that the water is being infiltrated through, and where it's being stored. So the spots where we're holding the water underneath the intersection and using different treatments on the sidewalk itself to alert people to what's happening underground. So often we hide our infrastructure. This is kind of an opportunity to try to shed some light on what's happening underneath the ground. This is an example of something that could be done in the green infrastructure bump outs, kind of putting mirrors on poles and interspersing those with the plantings. I mentioned we'll have these trail bioswales that are running adjacent to the trail itself, so doing some sort of vertical treatment within there. Blue water poles that can be interspersed again with those plantings. Thinking about the retaining wall, Stacy had mocked this up on an existing wall, but the 2 retaining walls that we have would also be spots that we could think about in future phases of the project, installing something like this silver disc stream that's giving you an idea of water, but it's happening on the wall itself. And then these are a couple ideas that could happen in the trail shoulders. These are also spots that can help to provide some shade along the trail while also bringing back that idea of water and celebrating the water on the corridor. So once again, there is a board that talks about these different public art ideas. We are asking you to vote on some of the ones that you think are most interesting. We also have comment cards, which are available both at the sign-in sheet and over by the public art board, where we're asking you to mark up on the map where you think that you'd be most interested in seeing public art. I mentioned some of the locations where it could be done, but if you think there's any spots along the corridor that are very special that you think really deserve extra public art there, we're looking for feedback there, and really any feedback that you have on the public art ideas. At this point, we're still in very preliminary phases of discussing these. Our design team has made sure that our designs can be installed and would not preclude future public art from coming in, so this is a great idea to get some of your ideas out there. So with that, this concludes the formal presentation portion of the night. I am going to bring the rest of the design team up for some question and answer. I'm sure you all have some questions that you'd like answered. And just a reminder that here we are in preliminary design, about to move into final design with a goal of construction in 2024 and 2025. Yep.
So thank you again. I'll be emceeing or facilitating receiving the questions, and the first question came from over here.
Mike, please.
Hold on a second. Is there a traveling mic?
No, unfortunately not.
Are you able to come up and?
Well,
It's a. If you come up to the mic, then it gets recorded because this is a recorded public.
thank you.
I was wondering what the total cost of this whole project will be per year. The initial cost and then what the maintenance costs will be per year for the next 10 years. Number 2 question, I'd like to know how many crashes and deaths are on these streets now. We were presented with this crash and death concept. So I'd like to know how many deaths and crashes have been on here per year for the last previous 5 years. How much of a threat is that?
Okay,
Okay, those are two questions. I have more.
okay, hold on a second, and I would like to be able to have other people ask questions as well.
Okay.
Cindy, if I could have you come up briefly. I do want to emphasize a couple of things.
Yeah.
That although this is in order to create the bicycling infrastructure, it's not exclusively for creating the safety or to address the high injury network. So a lot of it is to be able to provide access where there is not access currently. The ability for people to have places to walk and to ride and to enjoy the city and to learn a lot about what the infrastructure is that we provide. Not only the stormwater management, in a very self-interested way, I'm concerned that the city of Lancaster know how our water and infrastructure actually works, because we are in a consent decree period where we are about to spend a lot of money, or need to spend a lot of money, to be able to manage the cleanliness of the water that goes into the Conestoga. By people being more aware of where the water goes, how it is managed, and how you can intervene with it, that'll be good. Hold on. Yes. So the first question you had was about the total cost. This is Cindy McCormick, the city engineer for the city of Lancaster.
So as part of the project, the consultants have developed a construction cost estimate. So right now, the project is in the range of $4 million. We do have, as a lot of people have mentioned during the presentations, we have federal funding to help pay for this project. So we have a little over $3 million with that federal funding. So we have not developed any costs yet related to the actual maintenance of, the infrastructure is a lot of the infrastructure that already currently exists. So, the bike facilities and those kind of things, or the maintenance costs will not be a significant add to what we're maintaining already. The green infrastructure is just, continuing to add to the, what we have in the city. And, we are committed to maintaining those facilities because, as Steve mentioned, we have the consent decree, which is requiring us to deal with the stormwater. So green infrastructure has been a major component of how we want to deal with that. And we will, we've made the commitment to fund what we need to maintain it. I mean, the city will be responsible for maintaining it, correct?
And hold on a second. The increment of that maintenance will be continuing to go down because we're already investing in maintenance of not only bike infrastructure, but green infrastructure. We are training up all of our parks staff to be able to manage green infrastructure and maintain green infrastructure. So we are already building our bench depth in how we maintain the infrastructure that we're already making capital investments on. The other question I think you had related to its relationship to the high injury network and the number of deaths and high injuries that were here.
I think it's
So let me jump. Yeah, all those who are using the bike paths now, please raise your hands because that helps tremendously. So so part of our challenge is the following. I know you do want statistics, and we'll be able to give you some statistics, but the primary purpose is not to be solving for the high injury network. The primary purpose is to be building the infrastructure for active transportation and for alternate ways of using the public right-of-way. It's part of and consistent with the active transportation plan that was established by the county in the late 2010s, and that we are in the process of executing. The goals are, I think, admirable. When I talk, how many people here are part of the Downtowners, for instance? The Downtowners is an organization which is largely seniors who live and recreate here in the city of Lancaster. Part of what we're wanting to do is not necessarily, quote unquote, to prevent the bad accidents, although we definitely want to do that. We want to overall make a safer, more pedestrian-friendly environment. And that's a huge part, if not the primary part of this. The fact that it is, and related to the Vision Zero and being able to reduce those heavy injuries, is almost icing on the cake. The high injury networks are not necessarily in this particular location because much of Water Street is not heavily used by the vehicles. However, in concert with the Vision Zero and with the high injury networks as intersections as well as street areas, we're putting together an entire environment that is significantly safer, significantly more pedestrian friendly, and significantly more friendly for bicyclists and other alternate means of transport. I think there was someone else over here, though. Adrian? Oh, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to quickly note that we do have the statistics on crashes, and if you will see my colleague Alexandra after the presentation, we can give those to you.
So two things. I was just wondering if there was any thought into lowering the speed limit even more down to maybe 15 miles per hour, because we know that people typically have a habit of speeding, even with speed bumps. And the second thing is there any consideration for any signage encouraging drivers to not use Water Street, saying like local traffic only, things like that? Because, you know, we do have other streets that are accessible for people, and Water Street is typically, I mean, I know even I do this, is used as like a cut-through street. So if we can, you know, ask people to maybe use some of the bigger thoroughfares instead of using Water Street as a cut-through street, having some of that signage, even if it is something that people just glance at, saying like, this is, you know, for local traffic only. I've seen that in other cities. Maybe that would help. Thank you. And also, no death is an acceptable death.
Laura, did you want to talk a little bit about what's been considered? Oh, I'm sorry. Will?
Yeah, I'll address signing first a little bit with it as far as encouraging. I'm a little too far away. Can you all hear me now? I was going to address signing a little bit first as far as discouraging use as Water Street as a thoroughfare. You know, I think as we all know with the utility work on Prince Street the last couple of years that there's been a lot of additional traffic on Water Street. You know, we haven't been able to do a study yet to determine if volumes are decreasing, but, you know, with the speed humps and the curb extensions that are being proposed along the corridor, while we're not preventing vehicles from traveling through, it will be by design a slower corridor. The challenge with getting speeds down to 15 miles per hour is that while we could sign it at that speed, speed humps generally only produce a speed reduction in the low 20 range. So while it could potentially be signed at a lower speed, we won't be designing a road for that speed. So it becomes more of an enforcement for the city rather than actual design of the road at a 15 mile per hour speed.
Thank you, Will. Are there other? Sir?
Well, first, I'd like to compliment you on reconnecting Water Street from north to south. So I think that's a huge improvement. I just wanted to find out, where's the place for specific feedback on specific intersections where one might observe something that should be taken into account?
Laura?
So I'd say you're either welcome to provide that verbally to any of our team members. Also, the comment cards that on one side of the comment card is for feedback on the public art. The back side of the comment card is just whatever information or thoughts you have to share with us. So if you have any specific intersection locations or concerns that you'd like to notify us of, you're welcome to use the comment card, or you're welcome to email the project team, and you're also welcome to speak with us this evening. Any of those are fine. And it's also going to be on the Engage website.
That's the Engage Lancaster website. You can find it directly by engagelancaster.com, I believe. And you can also find it on the City of Lancaster website, looking for engagement, and you'll find that site.
Now it's on. Engage.cityoflancasterpa.com, or if you go to just cityoflancasterpa.com, right at the top, there's a button that says Engage Lancaster.
Yes, please.
All the consultants, wow. I've lived on North Prince Street for 50 years, and my garage is on Water Street for 50 years. In fact, we lived there so long that we remember the train used to come down Water Street, down to the end of Water Street. I'd say this, the only thing you can do worse in Lancaster, worse than doing nothing, is to try to do something. The intersection you fixed on Walnut and Water, when I saw that, I thought, this is the dumbest idea I've ever seen. It makes it so you can turn down a Water Street going south, and it gives you the opportunity to pull out into Walnut Street enough that you can see traffic. With this today, I was ready to come in and raise heck about not getting a notice, but apparently the notice was adequate because a lot of neighbors are here. I will say this, the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit, if you could do that in the entire city, amen. And if you could give the mayor a way to enforce it through local police using radar. Currently, we can't even enforce our speed limits. But again, I came here also at the urging of some neighbors who were concerned that this was going to be one-way Water Street. And I'm glad to see what you're doing. Looks really positive and really looks like a great plan to improve the neighborhood. So thank you and keep up the good work.
Other questions or comments? And I do continue to invite people to look at the boards as well. Yes?
First of all, it's really exciting. It looks great. Now, I was just in Far Rockaway, Queens, where they've pedestrianized and created trails on some former streets. And let me just do this. I can speak clearly for those of you who don't believe me. I was just in Far Rockaway, Queens, where they have done similar things on some streets that were considered to be almost highways. I think people call them stroads in planning jargon. And they have created an enormous increase in commerce. And can I use the word buzz? They've created enormous buzz. And I haven't heard anyone say anything about how this is going to change the nature of downtown. There's going to be like a new corridor where people will go and new opportunities for people to do business. And I haven't seen that. I would like to see accommodations for food trucks and food vendors especially. And in the area of public art, maybe you have to go to private art because there's the backs of art galleries facing Water Street on several blocks. And I was wondering if there's could be signage, or if you could consider the possibility of there being signage for this and accommodations for this, because people come to these things. There might be one busload in here tonight, but when we've had open streets, there have been thousands of people. I think this is going to be big buzz. Thank you.
Thank you. I not only agree with you, but I want to continue to mutually reinforce all the different activities that go on in the city. It is buzz, and it's related to the arts. It's related to the things that draw people into the city for all the variety of reasons, which is one of the reasons we want to make it as pedestrian friendly as possible. But each of these opportunities to bring people in are opportunities for us to see our art, to participate in it, to get involved in the communities, to get involved in the infrastructure that builds and maintains and sustains the city. I'm very excited about it, and I want not only more of that buzz, more of that interaction, but we are reaching out to the schools and reaching out to some of the not-for-profit advocacy organizations to try to link into all of this kind of activity as well. Many of you may remember the Open Streets event from 2 or 3 years ago. I was not yet here in Lancaster, but what I saw in terms of the pictures and the participation, it was huge. People were very excited about what's going on there, and we want to make sure that we connect to that and continue to build upon that. Each of you have new ideas, each of you have other ways of experiencing it, and we invite you into that conversation as well. You can be sharing those things either on the boards or on Engage Lancaster. We're looking for all of these at every opportunity. So thank you. Other comments, questions?
Hi, sorry, I'm short. I have two parts. One is a business owner. I do not live in the city, but I did live in the city. My first question is always about safety. Thank you for putting a crosswalk on Water Street at Marion Street. It's amazing. My customers don't get hit by cars anymore. I own Misi Candies. Safety along the trail, is there going to be any kind of you go to a college campus, you can pick up a phone if you have, some sort of an emergency on the trail, was one. Handicap parking, there's none in the city that I've seen. And the benches, if you don't have the extra thing for people to sit on, like my mother cannot sit on a bench if you don't have a secondary handle. So I think handicap accessible for this corridor is vital. There's a lot of people that are on different types of bikes and they cannot see if they're on a lower bike. So it's really important to make sure that those crosswalks are handicap accessible. As a business owner, it's really hard when you guys close the streets off all the time for open streets and such, because not everybody comes into the business. They stay out on the streets. So I am concerned that as this develops and becomes a bike corridor, you're going to want to close the streets more. And it's going to impact my business in a negative manner. And the other side of the business is, how are the trucks going to manage the turns when those bump outs have now narrowed the corner at Orange and Water Street, because they already have an issue now, and you're narrowing that corner, and that's you, the engineer. So I don't know. That's my questions.
Thank you very much, and our consultants are taking down these comments to try to be able to address it. Do you want to be able to address a couple of these comments?
Yeah, as far as the truck turning movements go, we talked to quite a few businesses along that we were aware had frequent truck access. And, some of the intersections on here with the bump outs where trucks currently turn may not be able to in the future. However, we tried to identify intersections along the corridor that trucks will still have access to and have easy entrance and exit to the corridor. So it may require traveling an additional block or two once they leave your business, but we do have intersections that still will accommodate the truck turning movements. I would have to look at the individual intersections and look at your movements.
I think for me, at least, one of the benefits of having these kinds of conversations is that it elevates this part of the challenge into the solution. It may not solve it, ultimately may not solve it to your satisfaction, but it means that we in the consultant team will be much more aware about exactly those kinds of concerns as the next phases of the development are going forward. And I'm hoping that in the next iteration, we'll be able to respond and say, having thought about this, these are the kinds of things we're able to do, and these are some of the things we're not quite able to do to be able to make it successful. But I do welcome exactly these kinds of comments. Yes, please.
Hi, my name's Angela Horst. I live at North Mulberry Street, so my property's not right along the actual Water Street, but the presentation's really clear. Thank you. As a longer distance bicyclist and knowing what a lot of those routes are, Harrisburg Pike is really crucial for getting into the city. It does not have a lot of intersections, so a lot of people we're getting out or into the city off of Harrisburg Pike, so that the intersections along the trail are circled and highlighted, but it would be really helpful to see how one comes off the trail on the north side and takes the westward route onto Harrisburg Pike, and as well on the south side. So people are going to use this to come either straight through the city, or even people living in the city coming from east to west to hit the trail. Going south, how does that intersection funnel those people onto 324, and what's the signage look like at that already kind of 5-point intersection?
Yeah, I think, for the trail, we know there's a lot of work to do at the 320, at the southern intersection for sure. The ultimate goal is to bring, be able to have bike traffic continue south, where needed. But, so we definitely recognize that there's work to do there. There is a PennDOT project to, reconfigure that intersection. It is currently on hold, knowing a lot of other work that the city has to do related to our combined sewer overflow. But know that that is all being considered in the future as far as, and pedestrian and bike access are the number one priority with any reconfiguration of that intersection. So, and yeah, we'll definitely look at the, Harrisburg Pike location to make sure that's incorporated.
Please.
Hi, I'm Steve Young, and a couple properties along the first block of North Water Street. So, a couple questions. Bike repair stations, is that a thought along the route there? I have a property in Lidditz, and they did that behind our property, and it was the ability of being able to sit down, there's a bench, ability to have a rack to be able to change your tube, whatever that might be. If there's an issue, it had a pump to be able to do everything you needed to. And the other thing is, I know that along the King Street corridor, lighting has been very important. Are we talking about lighting on Water Street as well as the trail, or what are we looking at there?
So we appreciate the comment on the bike repair stations. We do have a couple, around the city. So adding those to as an amenity would be an excellent idea. For lighting, we're not considering lighting along Water Street at this time. With the constrained width of the corridor, it would be hard to do something like King Street where we have the pedestrian scale lighting. We are looking at, we've recently obtained ownership of the street lights, so we are looking at swapping those out with LEDs, and a lot of that is helping with the distribution of light and helping to make the light more uniform and make it better in that regard. So I think some of those upgrades will help with the lighting, and if there's any specific areas that you have concerns about, we'd be happy to look at those as well.
So in terms of repair stations and other kinds of amenities that support not only bicyclists but pedestrians, et cetera, having an awareness and more signage or whatever may be useful. This is another plug for the Parks Master Plan, which is going to get started later on this summer, where we're looking at the park system as a network, and hopefully you'll be able to know from one location to another, where do you find the amenities such as basketball courts, bike lanes, other kinds of recreation assets, And these are the kinds of things that can be part of the wayfinding so that people are much more aware of the infrastructure that does support the city. I want to be aware that it's after 7:30 already, and I do want to be able to have anyone say or speak or raise comments as they wish. Please feel free to write your comments and pin them on the boards, to go onto the Engage Lancaster website, and for those who wish to still speak in the public forum, I still welcome you to come forward.